has the best bullpen in Major League Baseball? It seems like a simple question, but with all the moves at the deadline, it's a great excuse for us to dig into some electric arms and think about what statistics matter most when evaluating an entire bullpen. In this video, I'll give you 4 candidates. I'll break them down in detail, and then you'll get my rank. So let's get going. We'll start with the team that made the biggest splash at the deadline. Yes, AJ Preller doesn't value prospects as much as the industry does, and he shipped one of the best prospects in baseball, Leo DeVries, to the Athletics for 4 more years of Mason Miller on top of this coming postseason, which means the top 5 arms in the Padres bullpen shake out like this. Mason Miller, the lefty Adrian Morejon, former closer Robert Suarez, 2024 breakout Jeremiah Estrada, and the forgotten arm who has thrown the second most innings in baseball as a reliever since the start of 2024, Jason Adam. Here are some key stats on all these guys. Projected ERA shown here is via ATC projections on Fangraphs, 4-seam velo also because velocity is king, and then K- walk rate, which is still one of the simplest and most powerful pitching stats out there. There's 2 things I want to point out with this bullpen. The first is that Mason Miller is allowing a lot of damage on his 4-seam fastball. His righty results look fine, but against lefties, oh boy. And I'm looking at more underlying peripherals here like xwOBA on contact or barrel rate, trying to remove some of the noise created by Sacramento's park playing super hitter friendly this season. The Athletics gave him a pretty standard up target most of the time, and when he got it up there, it was great, but the second he moved off that top rail, the pitch got clobbered. And this is a pretty dramatic difference from last year, where if you compare his damage heat maps, this did not happen. Kind of a wild swing if we're being honest, and why this is happening is a great question. He's throwing fewer 4-seamers this season, falling from 72% last year to 55%. Perhaps it's something with how his slider and fastball are interacting in the strike zone, given his slider's a bit more inside to lefties this season. It's a weird one, and I'm not entirely sure I have the fix off the top of my head for the moment. Home run rates and barrel rates can be pretty fluky at times. I guess that's one solace for Padres fans. The other pitcher I want to call out is maybe not the guy you'd expect, but it's Adrian Morejon. He was a pitching prospect of theirs from the 2016 international class out of Cuba. He underwent Tommy John in 2021 and then came back mostly as a reliever. And as recently as 2023, he was kind of like this vertical 4-seam guy. And over the last few years, the Padres have lowered his slot, and he's pretty unrecognizable from a shape standpoint compared to his prospect days in 2016-2017. Compare these 2 pitch plots, for example. You can almost convince me these are 2 entirely different pitchers. On the left, we have the old Morejon, and on the right, we have heavy sinker slider, really hard to lift that sinker as a left-handed hitter, and then he's got a slider that's destroying righties. The base of the foundation of who he is still there, but the peripheral weapons have really changed. And that brings me to this breakdown of the Padres pen, perhaps a bit more in-depth than the raw stats we were looking at earlier. Here I'm showing you which handedness of hitter that reliever has performed better against over the last season, kind of a usage late game planning angle that I wanted to show. And then I'm giving you my one big thing with each of these guys, kind of a nerdy note that encapsulates the pitcher. For Morejon, it's that sinker I mentioned to lefties. For Mason Miller, I'm highlighting the variance in that 4-seam fastball from a swing and miss and barrel rate standpoint. And I'll also call out Adams' secondary first approach, which I love in a bullpen stocked with really good 4-seam fastballs. The Padres bullpen is going to be a tough one to beat. If there's a critique, it's that they allow more barrels than average, but this comes with the territory of having very good vertical hard 4-seam fastballs. They just have more variance on the whole. But how do they stack up against another National League team? One that traded a bunch of their minor league pitching depth for 2 arms, one of which was one of the best relievers last year, and another one is the funkiest pitcher in baseball. Yes, I'm talking about the Mets and David Stearns acquiring Ryan Helsley and Tyler Rogers. You mix those 2 with Edwin Diaz, Reed Garrett, and Gregory Soto, and that gives us this 5 from the Mets. And yes, I'm focusing on the top 5 arms for a given pen because I think those guys will be the most used in big game spots come the postseason. The main thing that jumps out to me here is that while you can argue the Mets' 1-2 punch is better than the Padres' 2 best relievers, both those Mets arms have stellar projected ERAs and K- walks, I don't think the Mets pen has the same level of depth in those 4th and 5th guys like the Padres do. Reed Garrett and Gregory Soto versus Jeremiah Estrada and Jason Adam, I think I lean towards the Padres combo. The edge I will give the Mets, however, is that they do have the look advantage. There was this old graphic on Fox during the postseason a few years ago about how the Rays created a pen that kind of surrounded a clock face when you consider the arm angles of those pitchers. The Mets don't totally have this, but they're kind of close. And perhaps this is all connected to Tyler Rogers being all the way down here. Funny, but I'd actually never looked at Rogers' pitch plot before, and it is hilarious. His sinker is down here, yes, where most curveballs are. And his slider is up here, where most left-handed fastballs are. It's just such a wacky look, with a track record of success for long enough that I think everybody in the sport is comfortable projecting him as one of the few contact-limiting gods. Rogers' barrel rate is 1.9% this year, the lowest in Major League Baseball among arms who have thrown 40 or more innings. The average is right around 8 or 9%. This highlights a primary point I want to bring up with the Mets bullpen. Compare them to the Padres for a second. We talked about how the Padres have high strikeout rate and high barrel rate. The Mets are really low on the barrel rate side, and they sacrifice a bit on the strikeout rate side. So think of it this way. In a late game situation, Padres' pen is in there. There's probably a better chance you run into a barrel late in the game, but there's also a greater chance that they just mow you down 1, 2, 3, and you don't even put a ball in play. You go to the Mets pen, I think it's harder or more unlikely that you're running into that multi-run homer late in the game through a barrel, but you're probably making more contact, maybe getting more guys on base. As to whether you prefer one of those approaches or the other, it kind of reveals your preference on that idea I proposed earlier about what statistics you want to value from an aggregate pen standpoint. Do you prefer the big whiffs and strikeouts, but some barrels, or do you want the more barrel limiting approach, but less of an ability to miss bats? I'm not entirely sure there's a correct answer to this question. Everything can be had on a sliding scale to some extent, and also maybe some of it is matchup dependent. And I'll give you my preference in a second, but on screen right now is what I showed for the Padres. Some basic notes on the handedness advantage some of these Mets arms have, and my one big thing for each of these guys. I love the 50-50 nature of Edwin Diaz's approach in all counts. He never goes above 55% usage or so of his slider or fastball against either handedness in pretty much any spot. Reed Garrett is out of zone a bit, which pushes his walk rate up, and for Helsley, look at the differential between his four seam and slider swinging strike rates. The unlock for the Mets bullpen, from my perspective, is whether they can figure out how to help Helsley's four-seamer. Despite a strong stuff grade, we now have a 2-year sample or so of it just not really missing a lot of bats. This season, the location of the pitch has drifted more up into his arm side against right-handed hitters. Could just be random variance, but also might be having some effect on its results. If the Mets can revive this pitch, give it some life, maybe even embrace the cutter shape he flashed earlier this season, which I thought was super sharp, although somebody in my Substack mentioned that he turfed it because it was affecting his four-seam fastball. Check out the link in the video description if you want to be a subscriber. It's essentially me brain dumping 4 to 5 times a week on arms across the league, and there are some extra goodies for paid subscribers. But back to Helsley, fixing this four-seamer somehow is the way to get him back to that 2 ERA he had last season with heavy barrel limiting ability, and maybe even unlock a level more. Or perhaps the path is just throwing 60% of this insane slider. So mano y mano here, Padres versus Mets. My preference is the Padres. And I say that partially because I think I prefer the strikeout angle and am willing to accept some laps on the barrel rate, so to speak. Maybe that's different than what most people would prefer. But I also think what pushes it over the top for me is the 4th and 5th arms that I mentioned earlier. I prefer Jason Adam and Jeremiah Estrada to Gregory Soto and Reed Garrett. And I think that's really the crux of it for me. If the Mets maybe had one more arm in the back half, I could be convinced that the barrel rate limiting is better than the strikeout drop you're going to see. But let's compare the Padres to another unit. The Yankees, yes, the team that is mightily struggling right now. Eno Saris had a piece on this very topic I'm walking through right now, which I'll admit was an inspiration for this video. I'm going to link to it in the video description. Eno does awesome stuff. I encourage you to check it out. This Yankee pen is the ultimate zoom out test. What I mean by that is that projections don't really care that they have a 4.87 ERA since the All-Star break. They care that the underlying stats and historic performance of these relievers still kind of look okay. Devin Williams is maybe the crux of this situation. Insane prior year performance, particularly in 22 and 23, and he's had a horrible 2025. So much so that it feels like something which isn't going to correct until the offseason. Luke Weaver's stuff is down, they optioned Jake Bird. Fernando Cruz coming back is a massive upgrade, and it's scary to think where they'd be in this very moment without David Bednar. Projections love them relative to their results, but man, does it take some gall to agree with the numbers here. And I'll admit, I don't think my mind passes that zoom out test. I'm just a little worried in the present moment that guys like Devin Williams and Luke Weaver don't bounce back and they become more reliant on like a Camilo Duvall and a David Bednar, who are good relievers, but I don't think they stack up to teams like the Padres and the Mets. And is there another team that could potentially jump either the Padres or the Mets, who right now are my front runners? Maybe. And it's the hottest team on planet Earth. All right, so maybe I'm embellishing a little bit. Showing the data here, they don't really beat the Mets or Padres in pretty much anything. Lower velocity, middling barrel rates allowed, lowest K-walk of the bunch. So you kind of have to build yourself a narrative here if you're buying in to the Brewers' pen. And that narrative is that they have some pretty grimy, fun arms. Miguel is a former Cubs castoff that they got throwing 2.5 ticks harder. Uribe found his ability to throw strikes this year. Ashby's actually one of my favorite relievers in baseball because he's very weird. High slot, low extension, really steep approach to his sinker in the zone. Impossible to barrel him. I know I left out Shelby Miller here. Maybe they have the raw depth to compete with the Mets, for example. That's definitely worth something, but despite how good Trevor Miguel has been, they lack that top-end pairing that is as strong as San Diego or the Mets. Unless you want to believe in small sample results. Do you believe that Miguel is now a top 5 closer in baseball going forward? Do you believe that Abner Uribe, as I mentioned, found his ability to throw strikes and that's not going to fade? Projections, for the most part, prefer some kind of sample. So they're not totally buying into Trevor Miguel being one of the best relievers in baseball, Uribe strike throwing, or Aaron Ashby finally being good. They want more sample, more reason to believe that that is the case going forward. I was actually in a scrum the other day with Cubs manager Craig Counsell, and he mentioned something to the effect of, all decisions are gut decisions, and data guides your gut. And I think that's a beautiful quote because it kind of applies to this situation we're talking about with bullpens. The Yankees are the stragglers in baseball in terms of vibes plus, and the Brewers are absolutely number one. And I think there's a case to be built around a variety of bullpens, particularly because relievers are working in such small sample. It's harder for us to see the long-term picture and smooth out all of those results. So as a byproduct of that, although I'm about to give you my rank, I think there's some justification for any order on these, particularly if you want to apply and massage things from a gut standpoint. I think you can apply gut to relievers more than you can for pretty much any other position in baseball. So here's a final zoomed out look to take a gander at some of the stats we were focused on throughout this video among the top 5 arms in these 4 bullpens. I think among these 4 teams, my rank is Padres, Mets, Yankees, and Brewers. Now, the big question for you, am I missing anybody? I think there's a lot of teams you could plug into that 4 spot over the Brewers. I think of the Mariners, for example, who Eno had in his piece as actually one of the most strongly projected bullpens going forward, even if that's roughly related to the fact that they play in a very pitcher-friendly park. Maybe you could throw the Phillies in there with Joan Duran. They just called up David Robertson. Do you believe in him, the old guy, succeeding? There's a lot of ways to go about this, and I want your thoughts. So if you've lasted to this point in the video, hop into the comments and give me who you think is the number 1 bullpen in baseball, but more importantly, who did I miss in that top 4 chunk? Who should be over the Brewers, who don't have the best projected results? As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.